This is Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to talk about 8 retro cars that should make a comeback. Retro cars have been big for the last 20 years, a little more than that actually, and sometimes car companies have brought back cars with retro designs that they really shouldn't have. But even as popular as retro has been, not every cool retro car has come back. So today, I'm going to discuss some of the retro cars that I think should return. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Lexus LX 470, which sold for $25,000. This Chevy Corvette Z06, beautiful car, brought $82,000. And this fantastic E30 BMW M3 project car brought $56,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it with a great selection and daily auctions at carsandbids.com. Okay, so retro cars that should make their way back. This list is alphabetical, going through 8 cars that were really cool back in the day that I think should come back in a modern form. And I'm gonna start with the ACURA NSX. Now I know they brought back the ACURA NSX, but they brought it back, I think we would all agree at this point, they brought it back kind of wrong. I love the new NSX, but they brought it back as, an automatic transmission, hybrid powered competitor to McLaren and Ferrari, and they really went into McLaren and Ferrari's world to compete with them. But the thing that made the old NSX so great is that it was like this analog car that also added Honda reliability. And I think that one of the misses with the NSX, well, Acura and Honda probably thought, well, no one is gonna pay that much anymore for a manual transmission car, that's been stripped down. We have to make this modern and fresh. Well, the truth is, people are paying a lot for old NSXs every single day. $70, $80, $90, $100,000+. There's a lot of people willing to spend that on a 25, 30-year-old car. You bring back a new one with that same level of simplicity, that same Honda Acura reliability, that same manual transmission and that feel, and that car would be a big hit. See, for instance, the Porsche 911R, the GT3s. People like the analog feel of that car, and the NSX has such a great reputation that they could bring that back and do well, in my opinion. Not just come out with a modern, futuristic car called the NSX, but actually go back and do like a retro version incorporating what everybody loved so much about the old one. Okay, next up, another fantastic retro car that should make a comeback, the Audi Quattro, the 80s Audi Quattro. This car here is so cool. And off-roading and adventuring has become such a hot thing these days. And safari builds of cool cars has become such a hot thing these days. Porsche 911s and other sports cars. Audi actually has this history, this rally racing history that they could tap into to bring back a modern version of the Audi Quattro. Make it like an off-roader sports car. I think that actually would do well. And frankly, I think it would be a lot more exciting and do a lot better than the TT. Take an existing Audi model or chassis and powertrain and lift it up a little bit and make it kind of this boxy, box-fendered vehicle like the old Audi Quattro, and I honestly think it would do well. And Audi has been seeing what BMW and Mercedes-Benz has been doing with their history and their heritage, and Audi just doesn't have as significant of a history as those brands. Well, here's an opportunity to get in touch with maybe the most historically significant Audi ever, the old Quattro, and bring that back, and I think it would do really well in this era of safari-themed off-roader type cars. Okay, next up, here's a retro car that obviously should come back. This is clear to everyone except for the automaker, and that would be the K5 Chevy Blazer. So the Blazer that was made throughout the 70s and 80s, honestly into the 90s, when the four-door version was called the Tahoe. These were iconic cars, and Ford has revived the Bronco, and they had huge demand and huge interest in it. The Jeep Wrangler has always continued with huge demand and huge interest, and Chevy brought back the Blazer, except it's an ugly crossover that is just kind of mediocre. It's such a disappointment that they brought that car back and burned that great name when they could have done an off-roader SUV like the Bronco Bronco, like the Raptor, like the Wrangler, that have all done so well. Off-roader vehicles are so hot right now. The 4Runner, the Raptor, the Wrangler, the Mercedes G-Wagon, the new Land Rover Defender, they're all in unbelievably short supply and high demand right now. And this was Chevy's opportunity, General Motors' opportunity to really go in and compete with those vehicles. And instead they gave away the name. I think that if they came back and capitalized on this hot off-roader market, they should have done it 5 years ago, but if they did it now, it would still be a big hit if they did it right, like Ford with the Bronco, at least until all of the production problems. Okay, next up, next cool car that I think would be great if it was retroized in the modern era, that would be the Dodge Viper. The Dodge Viper, when you think about it, was always kind of a retro car, even at the very end. They weren't really doing retro styling, but it had a V10 and a manual transmission, which was anachronistic even then. It felt very old school. And they canceled the Viper in like 15 or 16, I don't remember. But what's happened since then is Viper values have blown up. If you haven't been paying attention to this, it's true. Every Viper model has gone way, way up in value. The 2010s models, the last generation Viper especially, has been very, very, very valuable. And I'm sure there's a lot of people over at Chrysler, at FCA, Stellantis, kicking themselves right now saying, boy, I wish we had kept that going a little longer. The naturally aspirated engine, the manual transmission, all of this stuff is really in vogue right now. And the basic and raw nature of the Viper has been really, really cool. And it's become very, very desirable. In fact, I think the Viper is probably more desirable now than at any point throughout its entire history when it was actually in production. And the Viper has gone away and come back a few times over the years, and I think it's a good chance to bring it back. And you could almost do like a retro version of that early 90s one that was such an icon, and you bring the modern feel of a V10 manual car and combine it with that old design, which is still the most iconic Viper, and I think it would do quite well in this climate of manual transmission, raw cars being so desirable, and I think that would be cool. And speaking of old cars from that era coming back, how about the Ferrari Testarossa? Lamborghini has brought back the Countach. You can argue about whether that was a good idea or not and all that, but the Testarossa was an absolute icon with those strakes on the side, and I have to say, ever since Ferrari started designing the cars themselves and stopped using outside design houses, I've been a little disappointed in the designs. They just all look the same. It's a good look, but all the cars look relatively similar. I saw an SF90 Spider the other day, and that car looks so similar to an F8 Spider, which costs a third the money, that I would just be embarrassed. And I think that bringing back an old model like this, the Testarossa, with these cool strakes on the side, but modernizing it would be really neat. Now, Ferrari generally does not do retro designs. Their view is we are a design leader, and so we blaze the trails and everybody else kind of follows, and we don't look back, we look forward. And I get that, but I don't know, I think a side-straked modern Ferrari would be a really cool thing, especially because that car is such an icon of people who are now in the age of being able to buy a Ferrari. People in their 40s and 50s who grew up with the Testarossa, I think, would really appreciate a newer one that doesn't have the reliability and drivability issues of the old one. Okay, next up, another car from the past that I think should be revived as a retro car, that would be the Honda S2000. This goes back to the Acura NSX before. Honda's a very conservative company, and they don't like to take risks, and they view a manual transmission sports car as kind of a risk right now. But I don't think that that's true. I think if you look at used prices, S2000s are selling for used what they used to sell for new, or way over, honestly. NSX's same deal. There is a huge market right now for the analog sports car, and nobody is building a new one. And I think Honda sort of has a unique position to go back in and create a new manual transmission sports car. They are well known for doing this and doing it well, and I think if they revived the S2000, it would be very, very successful. Now, the S2000 is only 13 years old. You know, the latest ones are 2009. It would be a little weird to like bring that back as a retro car and like take design cues, whatever, but I don't think you need to do that. I just think you need to bring back the small but powerful manual sports car, and people will understand that this is the new coming of the S2000. And maybe instead of paying 40, 50 grand for nice 14-year-old S2000s, you could actually sell them some new cars. Okay, next, car from the past that I think should make a comeback, Toyota FJ40 Land Cruiser. This is an interesting one. It's a little bit controversial. The Land Cruiser has just gone away here in the United States, thanks to poor product planning and bad decision making from Toyota, the makers of the car. And, you know, in the past, the Land Cruiser has been sort of an icon that has lasted for decades and decades. But, of course, everybody knows it has gone away from its original purpose. It was sort of a purpose-built kind of Jeep vehicle, and it became this luxury vehicle over time. It's still incredibly capable, but it did. And I think that bringing back the FJ40 in sort of its original feel would be a successful thing. Just like I mentioned earlier talking about the K5 Blazer, the Wrangler and the Bronco have done exactly that, and the FJ would be poised to do that as well. Now, Toyota tried this. 15 years ago, they brought back sort of a modernized, cheeky version of the FJ40 called the FJ Cruiser. And it did reasonably well at the time. Toyota sold it in the States for like 7 or 8 years. But what's happened to the FJ Cruisers in the used market is there is immense demand. Off-roading SUVs are very popular right now. Toyota is a very hot brand because they have this reputation for durability. And I think if Toyota came out now with an FJ Cruiser, it would sell even better. You could sell it for even more money and it would do well. And you could even theoretically take the Land Cruiser brand name that is going away and apply it in some way to an FJ40 style car. And if people complain, just say, hey, look, this was the Land Cruiser and now it is again. And that might be controversial, but I think that Toyota is in sort of a unique position to be able to milk the retro SUV market. And they're not doing it in part because the 4Runner is doing so well, but I think that there are more sales here. People would defect from the Bronco with its problems and the Jeeps with their Chrysler reliability problems and go buy a car from Toyota, and they're already proving that by doing it in huge numbers with used FJ Cruisers. And finally, the last retro car from the past that I think should be brought back to the future. This one's easy. The Volkswagen Bus. This car has been immensely successful and it remains an absolute icon of the 1960s and the early 70s, and it has for decades. 2 generations now have looked back at this car and seen it as an icon, and Volkswagen has never revived it. They have threatened over the years to revive it, and they started making those threats again after the Dieselgate scandal when they needed some goodwill from the people. And the most recent thing I heard, it was a couple of years ago now, was that they were going to come back with an electric version of the bus. But that hasn't happened. Nothing has happened. They've teased concept cars for years, going back to the 90s, reviving the bus, and they never have. And frankly, I think they're missing an opportunity because van culture right now is absolutely huge. Sprinter vans are everywhere, and people are spending huge money for Sprinter vans, 100,000 plus. If Volkswagen came out with like a cool retro bus for half that money, I think it would be an absolute hit. And it's a shame that they haven't, and I think that they could, and I think that that's, of all the cars on this list, probably the most obvious one to bring back and do well. The segment is hot. Volkswagen already has huge credibility in that segment. They could make a cute version that looks good, and I think it would dominate, and I can't believe they haven't done that yet. So there you go. Those are my top 8 retro cars from the past that should be revived for the modern era. Frankly, I think if all 8 of these came back, it would be very, very successful. And I wish that the automakers would think a little outside the box and maybe do this. A modern Audi Quattro. Come on, that would just be so cool.